Hey, how's it going, brother?
Hey Richard, how are you?
I'm well, I'm well. Good to see you.
I've never done this before, so this is very new to me.
Well, welcome to the club.
Thank you.
You're part of the team. This is our 11th IG live for MenHealing.
Wow.
Yeah, as a part of our 90 days, $90,000 campaign in which we're looking to raise $90,000 to better support male survivors of various forms of harm, specifically sexual harm and sexual violence. And so I think as of today, we're at $60,000 that we've raised, um,
Wow.
which is great. And so I'm just really grateful for all of the people who just have, found it in their heart to donate and really give us the opportunity to make sure that we are able to serve as many male survivors as possible.
Yeah.
Um, and for those who would like to donate, you can text 90 NIN 90 to 44-321. And that's 90 and 90. Text that to 444 dash 321. All right, let's go. Let's get into it. All right, so we have someone who's been. How long have you been with Men Healing? First, introduce
Um,
yourself.
I
Introduce.
am sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Peitao Zhu. I am currently so I'm on the facilitator team of MenHealing. I think, maybe like just a few months, I believe, last June or July. Yeah, it hasn't been a year, so I'm pretty new to the team. I'm also on the project evaluation,
Mm,
um, uh, the program evaluation project of MenHealing as well. So what we do is sort of we take a look at, how are the different programs are being implemented, and are we meeting? Sort of, are we, how well are we adhering to the sort of the guiding principles and philosophies of MenHealing,
mm,
how are we achieving our goals and things like that. So I have sort of
mm.
two different roles in terms of MenHealing. I've also been involved with a storytelling project. In this past, we did a men's story project with 12 male survivors of sexual assault, and I was sort of participating in designing the workshop and ultimately implementing the workshop as well. But my sort of full time day job is I'm an assistant professor of counseling at Northern Illinois University. We train master's and doctoral level counselors. So
Wow. Okay. All right. So we got a lot to dig into, especially after our conversation yesterday. I heard a lot of
yeah,
things
yeah, it was
about you that
great.
I wanted to discuss. But so yeah, like, what drew you to Men Healing, and do you have like a specific interest or focus on male survivors of sexual violence and sexual harm?
I think I really got into this by accident. I don't
Hmm.
think I was, when I entered the profession, I was very clear about what I wanted to work with. I did my master's training in mental health counseling at Boston University,
Hmm.
and it was I think to this day I still didn't know why I really apply for this internship opportunity at Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, BARC, which
Hmm.
is a nonprofit organization working with survivors of sexual assault. And I don't know what was really behind my motivation, but for some reason I just felt really drawn to the population. And after I think after my interview, it only just affirmed that this is the place that I work at, not only because the training that they provide, but also just I guess the culture of the organization, the team, that feels just very welcoming, very accepting. And remember saying to myself, this is a group of people that I want to be with. I want to learn from them. Not only learn from them, I want to be with them. There's something about that environment that felt just very affirming. And I think that was sort of the introduction for me to working with sexual assault. Embark not only work with male, female, male survivors, but also female survivors. But I think I developed a strong interest, partially because of my supervisor Sharon Imperato at the time.
Mm-hmm.
She's also on the MenHealing facilitator team, and then she was such a crucial part in my professional growth, and I owe it to her uh, to say that like I would not have been doing this work if it weren't for her.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Sharon is awesome. I interviewed her about 4 weeks ago, and she did an amazing job talking about the work that she was doing at Park. So
Yeah.
tough act to follow. But you're doing amazing work as well. And as someone who's like a doctoral student and understand research and like the role that that plays in really informing the practice, right? I think that's one of the things that drew me personally into going into a doctoral program. I mean, beyond the fact that I just wanted to be, a PhD and be a doctor,
I know.
I'm just gonna say that's
Isn't
my
that
man,
isn't that
BJ. I was like,
prestigious?
oh, Dr. Smith, that sounds good. I like that.
Yeah.
Especially for my, my background, the things that I've been through. No one ever would have anticipated that I would be at a point where I would be like finishing up a doctorate. And so, but what really interests me is like the research and the way that I was able to see through my experience thus far, like how research has the potential to influence practice in a way that can inform us that we may not even think about. Because when we're in the midst of doing the work, there's so much like hands-on things that needs to be done. There's so many crises that needs to be attended to, right? That we don't have time to always think about like, what are best practices, what are best approaches to engaging and like sustaining relationships that are healing and supporting the healing journey of the folks that we're working with. And you and I talked a lot about this yesterday, specifically the role that cultural humility plays. And the first time I heard the term cultural humility, it was about 7 years ago, and I was working at a university, and we were developing a course, a social justice course, and the text that we were all reading together, myself and a few other faculty, full faculty and stuff, was said, the term cultural competency needs to be challenged and questioned in ways, and that cultural humility was much more of an affirming, term that really captured what needs to occur. And so, yes, share with folks like what you would like them to know about cultural humility, your research with cultural humility, and like why you, chose to focus on that.
Sure. Yeah, appreciate that question, and I really appreciate that introduction too, in terms of how we position cultural humility with cultural competence, which is typically the way we talk about culture when we train mental health practitioners, right? And I'll start with an experience that I had personally. So I'm an international, was an international student. I wasn't born in the U.S. and I grew up in Shanghai in China, and I came to the States 2014. So it's been 6, 7 years. It feels longer. I don't think I always thought about how long I've been here, but one of the things that obviously when I first came here, I was really appreciated all the focus on culture. Not only, we talk about race, ethnicity, we talk about, international status and gender and sexual orientation. And all of these things I felt, it was definitely affirmed a lot of the lived experiences that I had. But I also had lots of experiences where I feel like, even though this is helpful language, I oftentimes feel something is missing. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the, I guess, a really curious experience that I had was, I noticed when I talk to people in, conference and whatever, just having conversation, oftentimes people would ask, okay, so, where are you from? Are you from the US? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm from, China. And interestingly enough, that was the end of our conversation. There was no further interest. Oh, how is it like for you studying here? How is it like for you to speak a different language than your native language, right? Like, what was your educational experience like? How was your lived, how was your life after, coming to the States? So there's lots of sort of interesting gap in our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the starting point of my reflection of, okay, we've talked about cultural competence. We talk about what not to say, what not to ask, what questions are inappropriate. But
Mm-hmm.
but what's the consequence? What's the outcome? Are we really fostering a connection? Where are we still? Are we fostering a understanding between culture, or are we actually discouraging people from being curious and interest in having that interest in other people? And that's where sort of I started to encounter the term cultural humility, and I remember feeling that it just fits. It fits how I see culture issues. I think you really laid a good foundation for our discussion. Is culture is incredibly complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can, there are things that can be named, um, all of these demographic categories, right, that we can put a name to it, but there are also lots of stuff that are nuanced and that are subtle, that we really can't put them in a box or in a category. um, and I think cultural humility really um, captures that nuance and that complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And and,
Yeah.
and, and and I think that's one of the crucial reason why felt like I was really drawn to that. And the other thing that I felt really, I guess, helpful for me to operate from a position of cultural humility is there's room to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's much room nowadays in
Mm-hmm.
on a social level, on a just daily conversation, interpersonal level. There's very little room for anybody to say the wrong thing because they'll get canceled, they'll get dissed, or whatever it was. Um, People sometimes are really quick to make a judgment about, oh, I'm not going to talk to this person because they didn't use this right term. Um, while I understand the intentionality behind, we should be educating ourselves. We should be get ourselves, acquainted with the right language to use and whatever it is. But because, again, going back to this where we started, culture is complex. We
Mm-hmm.
can't get everything right. It's quite impossible to do that. Um, so a sense of humility allows people to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that this is hard and having a conversation about how can we make amends? How can we try to learn, try to understand each other better? So I guess that's what I most feel resonating with the term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love the way that you say, like, yeah, there's an opportunity for, regardless of the particular role, right, and dynamic, because we can talk about like counselor, you know, um, client type of relationship. We can talk about advocate. We can talk about outreach worker. I think cultural humility is something that's really relevant whenever you're working with folks in a serving, helping capacity, especially if you're not from that particular community, and
Yeah.
your effort and your goal and your hope is to try to provide some like meaningful support and services to that particular community. And the thing that comes to mind, like, because you said you can learn a lot about a particular culture, and I also think that that's important, right? Because it's like a lot of times we say. Folks that say, "Well, teach me about your culture." Well, there's also an opportunity for you to learn. There's books that you can read. There's Google where you can do a search and like find a lot of information. But we also know that you can't find out all of the information. And at some point, regardless of like the cultural identity that people like affirm and like subscribe to, or that's a part of their lived reality, there are individual experiences within that culture that are unique to that particular individual. And I think the concept of humility within the context of culture and the role of therapists and advocate and anyone who's in a helping profession really creates a dynamic that empowers the other person, right? That gives this an opportunity for a collaborative process to say, hey, teach me, like show me, let's do this together, right? I have this level of understanding. This is something that I'm aware of. but I'm not totally aware of everything that you've been through. And like you said, the complexities and the nuance of the cultural experiences requires that we have to do something like that.
Absolutely. I think you said it beautifully about the providing a learning opportunity, and that's all humility about. Because being humble means that you know that what you know is not always true.
Right.
There's unlimited knowledge out there, right? Just because you read an article about how to work with, for example, incarcerated population, doesn't mean that you know how to work with this kid, this person in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
because they're not just an incarcerated person, right? They
Right.
have their own values and beliefs and cultures and backgrounds and history and all of these different dimensions. There's no way that this person can be reduced to a single category. So whatever that you read, they're still relevant. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's to be humble is to have a tentative tendency when it comes to understanding, when it comes to knowledge, and know that you might very well be wrong, even if you've already tried your best to educate yourself. And I think that's a perfect sort of maybe segue to the topic of trauma as well, right? Because we,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much you can learn. Uh, Literature and different treatment modalities and different sort of specialty topics, specialty population. Yes, and all of these things are valuable, but at the same time, this person who a survivor of sexual assault, victimization in front of you is a unique human being, right? They might not map perfectly to whatever curriculum or model that you've learned before. And then how are you going to adjust your approach? How are you going to really demonstrate and enact that sense of curiosity and respect
Mm-hmm.
for this person who who you're working with. So, and I think that to me is how cultural humility can be really relevant to trauma work, and specifically, sexual trauma as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as someone who, really focuses on the experiences of Black and Brown men as survivors of sexual harm and various forms of harm and trauma, I think it's so important, right, that this perspective is taken into consideration and incorporated into the approaches that we develop to try to engage, right? Because it does create that collaborative process that says that
Yeah.
I'm humble enough to know that I don't know. Show me some
Right.
things and teach me some things. It empowers a person by helping them realize that there's some insight and perspective that they have, that even though the person with all the credentials and the degrees may not know, and that you can help inform their practice so they'll be better prepared to support the next person that they work with, by also taking into consideration that that person is also another unique individual. So it's like this
Yeah.
perpetual, constant learning process. And I think that's the beauty of the curiosity that you were describing, right? This like curiosity of always being open and
Right.
humble and willing to learn and
Right.
understand, right? And going into these situations and suspending the judgment. Because I think that's the reason why cultural competency was relevant at the time. And even though we've expanded the concept, like the judgments that previously were a part of this process were so harmful. They were essentially
Mhm.
causing more harm to the person who
Yeah.
experienced harm that you were working with, because those
Right.
judgments oftentimes were rooted in a lot of stereotypes. They were rooted in racist ideology
Mhm.
and patriarchy and like sexist views about the other person. And so there
Right.
was like this push to get us to like say, hey, we need to understand some things and learn some things about other people that challenges our biases so that we
Right.
don't cause further harm. So it's just been
Right.
like this progressive process that's happened. And
Absolutely.
the other thing that we talked about, because I think it's there's really just like this interplay between the two, right? Like,
Hmm.
because the way that I was thinking about it before our conversation, like shame and your work around shame and your research around
Yeah.
shame, and we know like the connection between shame and trauma, and like
Hmm.
how cultural humility can be like that can help buffer that can help support someone so that they don't go into that space of shame that's
Right.
associated with that trauma, that's based on what we've learned to believe that something is wrong with us, because that's the
Right.
major shift, right? There's nothing wrong with you, something happened to you, right? But like cultural humility says something is right with you, and you can help me understand what's right with you and also what happened to you. So could you talk about your research on shame and like how that applies
Yeah.
in your perspective?
I think I got it, and this is also something I don't think it came from reading literature. I think it really came from a sense of working with survivors of sexual victimization, because there's just pervasive sense of shame, um,
Mm-hmm.
and what's really interesting is that it all manifests in different ways, right? Shame is a very, if we're talking about just the more raw feeling of shame, when we talk about it, always people usually associate that with a sense of feeling small, feeling restricted, that they want to hide, they want to go away, they want to disappear, they don't feel like they matter, they feel broken, right? Like there's a sense of that, and it's intensely painful emotion. I don't really think anybody can allow themselves to feel shamed, uh, at the way that raw emotion manifests, because it's so painful. I think it's sort of uh, it eliminates that sense of self that we have, because we want to feel worthwhile, right? We want to feel that we're a worthy person, that we deserve attention, that we deserve caring. But shame is the exact opposite of that. But really interesting is that shame gets transformed into many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can manifest as dissociation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it manifests as anger and aggression. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it manifests as overcompensating, right? Because I don't feel worthy, so I'm going to do everything I can to show you that I really, really, really want you to care about me. So there's so many different ways that shame gets transformed into other behaviors and feelings. And I think that's where cultural humility really plays a part, is again, you can learn about shame, you can learn about how to treat shame, you can learn about how to talk about shame, broach shame in counseling, you can learn about different treatment modalities that are really effective in addressing shame, right? But you have to be aware that whatever experience is associated with shame is going to be very individualized, when it's specific to the person that's right in front of you. I imagine, when I started kind of studying the topic, I feel like, oh, shame is important. I'm going to talk about shame, right? And I find myself going to my session, sort of broaching this topic, and I quickly realize that you can't force people to talk about this. There's Just because you name something doesn't mean that they're ready to talk about it, and you have to be reflective of: is this something I'm imposing on my clients? Is this something, or am I actually following them? Am I being there with them, or am I sort of waiting for them at the finish line? Because that's not a healthy dynamics in counseling, right? You can drag them toward a direction that they're not ready to go yet. You can't force them to be on a journey that they're not ready, that they haven't prepared themselves for. So all of these things are to say that, I think shame intersects with culture, intersects with race, ethnicity, intersects with a lot of the like the family values, intersects with their interpersonal style, and as much as we can learn about it, uh, we need to be again operating from a position of humility, that we don't know. We don't know how this is going to turn out. We don't know how this is going to manifest for this person.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that describe some of the responses that people have to shame, right?
Mhm.
And immediately it makes me think of like as like black and brown people, as a person of color, as a black person, black man who's formerly incarcerated. Like growing up, regardless of like my interpersonal experience of violence and trauma, there were all of these shaming messages that came under,
Yeah.
the ideology of white supremacy, that told me capitalism, that told me I was less than because I was poor, or because I was black, or because, all of these things. So there's like this constant experience and feeling of shame that influences the ways that we respond, right? And like the responses that you just described, the anger, the overcompensation. These types of behaviors are, like responses to shame. They're also responses to trauma. And
Right.
then as a therapist, you encounter someone and you go in, like you have to have humility and have to
Right.
be able to suspend your judgment. or it's
Right.
going to be disastrous because this person is not only coming with the shame that's associated with the particular issue that they dealt with, let's say,
Mhm.
the experience of sexual violence as a male, but they're coming with the years of shame for messages that they've received and internalized as a black person, as a queer
Mhm.
person, as a woman, right? Like there's so many shaming messages that they bring because
Yeah.
of those other identities that they represent and come into your space with, that you have to have humility on top of humility to like be able to suspend the judgment and really get a grasp of where the person is at. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you naming that.
And I think, as you were talking about, I think I was reminded of some of the clients that I've worked with. I remember there one particular client I went every time, every time that I work with them, I feel just a profound sense of incompetence. I don't know what they're talking about. I feel like I'm always surprised at what they're saying to me. I don't feel like, I don't feel that sense of incompetent or lack of confidence when I work with other clients. So I started to kind of really notice that. Like, what
Mm-hmm,
was it that was, I feel like I was out of pace or out of the rhythm. It's not the rhythm that I would like to approach. And I started to feel just lost and confused and all that.
mm-hmm,
And I think it wasn't until at least several months into the our work, and I talked to my supervisor about this, and started to notice, you know what? Maybe this is a way that they're expressed to me how they're feeling. Maybe that sense of I'm not a good counselor, or I'm not helping you, that I'm wasting your time. Maybe that's how they're feeling internally. Maybe that's their way of communicating to me the shame that they're experiencing, right?
mm-hmm,
And that was and that realization really really helped me, because and it started to kind of helping myself regulate whatever internally that I was feeling, because I was dysregulated, and I was dreading going to that session with
mm-hmm,
them. So and again, like being able to be aware of that provided an opportunity for me to really reflect on, and I love the word that you use, suspending, right?
mm-hmm,
Because if I wasn't able to suspend my judgment towards myself, I would not have had this opportunity to learn from this client. I also have another client who, the first time that they're meeting with me, and I think this was an intake session, they're like, yeah, I had this, I was sexually assaulted 2 years ago. I'm over it. I don't want to talk. We don't need to talk about this. We can talk about something else. That doesn't impact me, right? Um, but then as we went into our work, what was happening for them was they're trying to say, how dare you to suggest that I was impacted by this? How
mm-hmm,
dare you
mm-hmm.
to trying to tell me that I haven't gone over, that I
Yep.
haven't, you know, gone over, that I'm still somehow broken because of this, right? And again, I think if we really allow ourselves to think about that, that came from a sense of shame,
Mm-hmm,
that I'm supposed to be invincible. I'm supposed to get over this, but I'm not. But I'm not telling you that I'm broken because of this. So all of these, it's fascinating how it can manifest for different people, and all of what the examples that I share with you, oftentimes these beliefs, and they intersect with how they were a culture, how they're socialized, and what they taught, believe, what it means to be strong, what it means to be independent, what it means to be productive, right, in a
mm-hmm,
capitalist sort of society, what it means to be useful, and
mm-hmm,
what it means for them not to meet these expectations. So
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, you
yeah.
touched on a couple of things. Like the first thing comes to mind is like the shame that the therapist or the helper experiences, right? Being socialized and educated to be the knower, right? That a big part of your educational experience is like to gain knowledge and awareness of these things in a way that you are an expert, right? You come into this and you're supposed to know. So like when you
Yep.
encounter a situation that challenges that, right, to your point, that causes a sense of shame, like, and doubt and like fear, like, wow, I don't know what I'm talking about,
Right.
fortunately you have the resources and the relationships to like go and process that in a way that helps you to like reduce that and deal with that conflict,
Mhm.
assuage that, so that you can come back and be more ready. But I'm also thinking about wow, because like when you touched on the person who just essentially, and the way that I understood it, and Dr. Sean Jenwright's work talks about this, and healing centered approaches, that a person does not want to be the sum total of their trauma.
Right.
So in addition to shifting from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, we're going
Right.
to what's right with you, right? And people talk
Right.
about this within the context of post-traumatic growth, and somewhat of an opposition of resilience, like not just
Yeah.
bouncing back to baseline, but like growing beyond the experience that you've had, right? And as someone who's a survivor of gun violence, a survivor of sexual abuse and incarceration, like I
Right.
know firsthand, like those experiences were traumatic, but from those experiences, I was also able to pull like deep insight and perspective that
Right.
allows me to have this ability to support people in a unique way. And so there's something that's right with me. And I love that you pointed that out, because no one wants to feel like I am the sum total of my trauma, right? I'm
Absolutely.
more than my trauma. I'm more than what I've experienced.
Yeah, and I think I love what you're saying, and I think like with the word that comes to mind actually is actually transcendence. And I think,
Yes.
it's yes, we're talking about trauma, and it's such an important topic, and we don't want that to happen to anybody, right? Like obviously, these are really crappy things that we keep, uh, uh, the trauma that happened to these individuals, but at the same time, we can't be talk about trauma from a position of a savior, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're so miserable that you are broken, right? As soon as we're talking about trauma in that way, I think we're reducing again a person, a complex human being, to this one specific
Yeah.
aspect of their life.
Right.
They're not defined, they're impacted, they're shaped by their experience for sure, but they're not just that, right?
Right.
And again, being that, I think we keep going back to this point of being curious about that person, not just about their traumatic experience, but about who they are, the totality, the holistic aspect of who they are. So yeah.
You over here, you preaching tonight. You know you preaching, right? You been to a Baptist church? Because you preaching.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, listen, I mean, we have 1 minute left.
Sure.
This has been amazing. I knew it was going to be like, I don't know who decided that we were going to have these conversations for half an hour, but we definitely need to extend them, especially for tonight, because I know we could talk about this all
Sure.
night. You have so much to
I
say.
agree. Yep.
And I'm sure that people are going to get a bunch of information already. And let folks know how they can reach you if they want to learn more about their research and like have further conversations about shame and culture of humility. Because I'm sure that there are therapists, people who are in the health profession out there right now, who would love
Yeah.
to connect with you.
Yeah, for sure. So I can throw my email address somewhere. I am sure, I don't know if there what's the better sort of way for me to type that, where I can provide for you, Richard. But feel free to just search my name. I'm at Northern Illinois University. We actually have a trauma informed counseling certificate program for practitioners. If you're interested, I personally do, trauma is my clinical interest. I try to do some research topic, on this topic as well. But I really think I'm just so passionate about, there's so many things out there we can learn. And I don't think trauma is a specialty area.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's rare these days that I encounter any clients without some kind of significant trauma history, right? So I really think this should be one of the fundamental, I guess, core areas that we should be educating ourselves and other practitioners as well. So yeah,
Absolutely.
if anybody who is interested in sort of talking more about this, I am always up for a good conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Sure.
And we can also hit you up on your IG too, that you'll see on the
Sounds good.
MenHealing page. So thank you so much. I appreciate this. This is
Thank you,
great.
Richard.
I'm done. It's Taco Tuesdays. I'm ready to get up out of here.
All right.
Have a good night. Thank
Have a
you
good
all
night.
for
All
coming.
right.
I see some familiar faces in there. You know who you are. Woo, woo. All right. Bye.
Nice.
Peace.
Bye.